Welcome to the Closing the Trust Gap podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to visit with leaders from a wide variety of vocations and industries who are unafraid to have honest conversations about how organizations can become more trustworthy. My name is Corey Shear, and I'm the founder and CEO of Trust-Centric Consulting and the author of the book titled Closing the Trust Gap. I truly hope that this conversation is helpful and will inspire you to take action on strengthening trust. Well, welcome back to the Closing the Trust Gap podcast. Marcus, it is so great to have you on the show today. And you and I, we're both in the Midwest. I'm in Kansas City and you are a little bit over to the right over in Nashville. And it's just great to be with you, a longtime friend, a mentor in so many ways, somebody that has helped me wrestle through this whole topic on trust, but then has also been a huge part of influencing me to do this work now full time. So Marcus, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Corey. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. Well, Marcus, tell us a little bit about who you are, the work that you do, and then if you want to throw in even a little bit about some of your recent world travels, that would be awesome.
Yeah, happy to. So I like to say, a recovering HR practitioner. Started my career in the world of HR and then eventually expanded out into a variety of other roles, including sales and marketing and strategy. And today I work for a very large technology company called Infor. It's actually owned by Coke, K-O-C-H. And we provide enterprise software to really change the way that people work. And so my focus still is on the kind of the HR side of things, but the HR technology side. It's taken me all over the world. I spent the last 3 years in the UK, 2 years in London, and the last year in Edinburgh. And my title today is the Future of Work Strategist. This is what happens when you let somebody pick their own title, which my boss mistakenly did. But really, I focus on how do we elevate the way humanity works. And coming out of the pandemic, Corey, everything's changed. All of those norms that we were used to were unfrozen. Now they're starting to refreeze. And the question is, how do we refreeze them in a way that's advantageous to all of us? So
It's couldn't be more relevant. I mean, you know the data better than anyone. In 2022, in America, 50.5 million people left their jobs.
yeah, I
The
believe
Great
it.
Resignation. That's almost a third of the workforce. And so when you think about that, now we're in 2024. 50.5 million people, probably the majority of them, have re-entered back into the workforce. And so to your point, I love how you said things were unfrozen and then now they're beginning to kind of set and refreeze. As you consider what has occurred over the last couple of years from a data standpoint, what are some of the trends that you all are seeing as it relates to workplace culture, engagement, even retention? I know that you do a lot of work around some of those leading indicators where as you start seeing engagement drop with employees, that becomes a leading indicator of what will ultimately perhaps lead to either an exit out of that organization or decreased productivity or decreased satisfaction. So what are some of the things that you've been seeing in the last 2 years?
Well, what I'd like to do, Corey, is I'd like to focus on the timely and the timeless. And when I speak of the timely, obviously there's no bigger topic right now than artificial intelligence and generative AI in particular, just new technologies that we have all embraced coming out of the pandemic. Working from home, it changed a lot of those norms that we're accustomed to. So we need to understand how new technologies are influencing how people work, when, where, even some cases why they work.
Yeah.
And then the time less are things like, when I was in the UK, I actually went to the University of Sussex and I went back to school and I studied the psychology of kindness and well-being at work. And it just reinforced these timeless needs that people have at work. They want meaning. They want to be competent and good at what they do. They want to have strong relationships with people. So when you combine the timely and the timeless, you have this opportunity to potentially change the way that you're doing things today, embracing new technology while also acknowledging the things that probably aren't going to change. Work
Yeah.
is very relational. Work is very personal for a lot of us. So in terms of what we're seeing, Corey, you know, things have changed, and then in some cases they haven't. We actually surveyed 13,000 people here recently and asked them. These are all people that were leaving their current job. So you talk about that 50 million.
Yep.
So we asked 13,000 of them, why? Why are you considering leaving your job? And the number one answer by far was 59% of them said, I don't see any opportunities for me here. They didn't have hope. They didn't have something to look forward to. You know, the second answer was 23% said money, right? So people go, oh, money doesn't matter. Actually, it does.
It does.
Most
Yep.
people, that's not the number one reason. So it's kind of funny, Corey, that things have changed and yet they remain the same. People want to know that there's something to look forward to.
And if you only gave people money, that may not necessarily move the needle for people who just, because that's a single approach to trying to engage somebody. Where when I hear you talk about hope, which when I think about you, Marcus, you're not only a hope broker, you're a hope expert. Like, you have spent a significant amount of time wrestling with, thinking about this, getting trained in this, writing about it, and then integrating it in the work that you do, which I love that. But when you talk about hope, what it makes me think of is that when we reduce the options for people, when it's only about money, when it's only about, whatever the policy or procedure, what you're doing is you're reducing their options. And as those options get less and less, so does their hope. Do you find that to be true, where it's like, they so badly want just to be able to choose, and not extravagant things, but just the optionality is something that is very powerful for us, for hope?
No, I think you're right. I think choice is such a fundamental human need. And for a large part of the world's workforce, we focus a lot on what we call the deskless workforce or shift-based workers. I don't know if you realize it, Corey. 80% of the world's workforce is deskless, okay? And yet we design technology, we design systems and structures for people like you and I that sit at a computer most of the day, when most people aren't. And so what my point in bringing that up is a lot of those people are hourly. And so they have like a schedule that changes from week to week. And when they don't have control and choice over that schedule, it has a really negative impact. So I think you're right. And back to the whole hope concept, Corey, I mean, it is definitely one of my favorite topics out there. Shameless plug for my LinkedIn newsletter. I just posted hope at work yesterday. And I thought you'd get a kick out of this, because if you look at how the Cambridge Dictionary defines hope, if you look at it as a noun, it's a feeling or expectation and desire for a particular thing to happen, or a feeling of trust.
Interesting. A feeling of trust. I've never heard that described as a feeling of trust before. So that
you're trusting that something good is going to happen in the future.
And my favorite definition of trust is that it's a firm belief in the truth of something. And really, if you were to boil that down, it is, I'm hoping for truth. And when our belief in something goes away, or when our hope in something goes away, that is a violation of trust, because it's not conducive to somebody being trustworthy. If I have no hope that what you are about today is going to be the same tomorrow, then I'm going to lose hope. And as we lose hope in individuals or organizations or even brands that we're so loyal to, and it becomes obviously a very challenging experience for us individually. But one of the other big challenges is that if I lose hope in something, or if I lose trust in like a brand, for example, I have so many other options, so many other replacements that they are waiting to take my business. And so for you, as you think about hope, even in terms of brands that are trying to convey truth and trust, but also where they want to inspire hope in their customers, what are some of the biggest challenges for companies these days as it relates to communicating hope to their customers?
Ooh, That is a deep question. And you know what? I'm going to give you an example of a really challenging kind of industry, healthcare. Okay, you want to talk about an industry that you better have trust and
Yeah.
you better have hope that you are going to take good care of me. And what's interesting about the world of healthcare is that today it's much more consumer oriented because people realize, we talked earlier about having choices,
Yeah.
they have choices now.
They do.
Instead of like just going to whatever the local, closest healthcare facility or hospital or doctor's office, now they're like, wait a minute, I have access to way more than I did before. I want to go to the one that inspires the most hope and trust and confidence that I think is going to take really good care of me. And so healthcare organizations historically have not necessarily had to grapple with that, to treat people like consumers who have choices. And I think the other thing that's happening is that we as humans, we used to go to the doctor and we would just do whatever they said. And now we're kind of questioning, like, well, is that the right thing for me? And
Yeah.
so that is part of the mix too, which changes the dynamic of that relationship. So I
It
think that's
does.
a good example. I don't know about you.
Well, and it's everywhere. I mean, and we're one diagnosis, we're one fall, we're one car accident, we're one illness away from this inevitable reality that we're going to have to put our hope in something, and that hope is healthcare, which is why I think the challenges of COVID is that it put such a tremendous load onto the system, and to where I recall, even a close family member of mine that was eventually they passed away from COVID on a ventilator. But I remember speaking to the healthcare workers, and they literally expressed to me that they were becoming hopeless because they could not figure out. This was at the peak of COVID in December of
Mm.
2020, but they could not figure out case after case after case. And it was, there was no standardization of care that they could provide to these very, very sick individuals. And you could hear it in their voice. They were losing hope.
Yeah.
And so now, even as you talked about the unfreezing and now the refreezing, and obviously healthcare, there is such a significant need for quality healthcare workers,
Mm.
facilities. There's consolidation that's occurring because of the high cost, all of those things. So I think you're exactly right. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of a leader, a manager, an executive within healthcare. If you were their coach or their executive, their consultant or their executive coach, what would you encourage them to do first in order to start thinking more specifically and intentionally about hope in their workplace?
Yeah, the funny thing is, my last paper at the University of Sussex, I had to create some interventions, and I chose to do it for the healthcare workforce, particularly for anybody who's in a supervisory role. And the reason I chose that, Corey, is that the span of control, if you know what I mean by span of control, how many people report up to somebody? In most industries, you can handle what, maybe 12 to 15 people.
Yeah,
It's
Mac.
it's
Yeah,
frequently over 100 in healthcare. A charge nurse frequently has 100 people.
yeah,
So the question is, how do we address their needs in terms of again, creating that hope? I'd say it's two things. Number one, it's recognizing and understanding that there is intrinsic meaning in the work that's being done in healthcare. Like, you don't have to fabricate that. There's meaning in it,
yeah,
but we
yeah,
lose sight of it. People don't go into healthcare because it's a job or even it's because it's a career. They think of it as a calling. But then they
mhm,
lose sight of that calling when they get tired of the administrative minutia, sitting and having to chart all day. They can't even look
yeah,
at patients. They have to just stare at the computer. And so they lose sight of that. So how do we reconnect them with their why? Why
mm,
did they get into this to start with? And then the second thing, and this is really important, Corey, is that every single person in every organization is unique and is different, and therefore requires some level of personalization in how we interact with them. So what gives you hope may be really different than what gives me hope.
yeah,
And I think that's critical. To one size fits all management just isn't going to fly anymore, especially with the next generation that expects a lot more.
It's true. And, you and I have talked about this concept of empathy and
Mhm.
how do we activate empathy? Empathy is a critical part of how you build trust with other people, specifically in the building block of caring for others. And those questions of what is this person seeing? What are they hearing? What are they feeling? What is their pain? What are their gains? I mean, I think it's just we hear it often, but it bears repeating. We need to listen first. We need to then take action on what we have heard. And then we need to ensure that whatever we take action on is going to ultimately support and care for the person that we're with. Otherwise, we miss such a significant opportunity to build trust and then generate that feeling, which is hope. And I kind of want to switch gears a little bit. I'm really curious. At what point in your professional career did hope become a significant pursuit for you, where you wanted to formalize your educational and your thought leadership, and now even as you are a voice that is pervasive through a large network of people through your newsletter and on LinkedIn about hope, like what was the point in your vocational career where hope really rose to the top for you?
It was actually really early. I went to the University of Kansas, and I think it was 96, dating myself now. I literally took a class called The Psychology of Hope, and it was taught by Rick Snyder, who I didn't realize at the time is like the luminary in the space, wrote a book called The Psychology of Hope. That was like our textbook. And it was that class that made me just genuinely fall in love with it.
Mhm.
And I started to think, and I said this in my recent newsletter post, I think this is more important than the base of Maslow's hierarchy of physiological needs of air and food and water. Because
Yeah.
if you don't have hope, you don't want to eat. You don't care if you have water and the basics of life. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, we see, just incredible percentages of people that are depressed and suicidal and have no hope. And
Yeah.
so it just made me think, I think it's again, when you think about the foundational elements of life, trust and hope are really at the top of the list for me.
They're huge. And how does a leader or a team create the optimal conditions for hope? In my book, we talk about how like pizza party Fridays, cookies in the mailbox, like those things, like they're not going to cut it. The employee parking spots. I love it. Every time you go to an organization where there's an employee parking spot, you never see a car parked in the parking spot. It's because that employee, they do not like that does not resonate with them. They don't want to be singled out. That those tactics do not work. So when you think about kind of creating very intentional conditions for hope within a work environment, what would be some of your key kind of first steps?
I would say the most important thing, and I think it's really relevant right now, Corey, is this concept of internal mobility. And keep in mind, I'm not necessarily suggesting that everybody wants to go like all the way up the ladder and hit the C suite. And I want promotions and new titles and lots of money. Some people want that. Other people just want to know, again, that they have something to look forward to and
Mm.
that they feel like you're using my superpowers
Yeah,
and
good.
I am doing something that's relevant and I care about and I'm good at it. And so internal mobility becomes important because two reasons. Number one, organizations change and people change.
Yep.
Organizations are changing dramatically if you think about the pace of change, technology, socioeconomic status, everything is changing around us. And so I get hired to do a job. 6 months later, that job's totally different. And then people change too. I don't know about you. I'm a little different than I was 10 years ago, 20 years
Just a
ago.
little, yeah, just a bit.
I have different needs and expectations. And so if things are constantly changing all around us, then that means we need to constantly give people an opportunity to change within the organization that they're at, to
Yep.
use their transferable skills to maybe do something different. Give them a side hustle where they have a project to focus on that they're passionate about, but maybe they still do their day job over here. I just think internal mobility, because And the reason that's really important right now, Corey, is I think today we have like 9 million job openings in the US. We have like 5 or 6 million people looking for jobs. That's a 3 million gap. Do you
Yeah.
know by 2030, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, thinks we're going to add another 11 million jobs? There aren't enough people. Don't worry about AI taking jobs. We desperately need them to. So if that's the case, then we better get really good at hanging on to the
Yep.
talent that we have today. And that means giving them internal mobility to try new things and to do new things. I think it's critical.
It is, and what you just said prompted me to think about one of my favorite delineations between management and leadership. So when we think about the difference between, managing mobility or leading mobility for individuals within an organization, two different things, both important because we still have to manage. There are management functions that we have to carry out, but there's an article that was written a couple of decades ago, and it was a case study, and the author talked about how management is all about creating the conditions for deja vu, meaning we've run this report before, we've done this budget before, we interview with similar types of questions, we have meetings that are consistent. We have pricing that is consistent with our customers. So these are all of the functions that are important from management for creating the conditions for deja vu. So management, it's critical. And if you've experienced deja vu, it is this odd experience where it's a smell or a sight or a sound where it ushers you back. One of the things that whenever I smell like cinnamon bread, it takes me, well, what the deja vu emotion is actually that I have no money left because the cinnamon bread makes me think of the churros at Disneyland. And whenever I'm at Disneyland, I have no money because I have 4 kids. So
Yeah.
cinnamon, like warm cinnamon bread, my deja vu is I have no money, which is a terrible deja vu experience. But these conditions are deja vu. But what leadership is about creating the conditions for vujade, which is a real term. And what vujade is that we are going to intentionally step into something that is new in the future. And it's the combination of both deja vu and vujade that creates a very effective organization that has good management and good leadership. And so, like when I think about the employee experience or the employee pathway, wouldn't you agree that we need to have deja vu, but we must be committed to vujade?
Yeah, I like that. I've never heard that. That's good. I think there needs to be that standardization and consistency, right? I think we all crave that. That's why people go to McDonald's. McDonald's is not good, but it's consistent. So people are like, I'm going.
Yeah.
Um, and and yet, if we want to, and we expect people to try new things and to get into new things, this is where I think trust becomes really important because trying new things, being innovative, being creative means you're giving me permission to make mistakes, to do things the wrong way. If it's new, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
And so that's where trust becomes, again, so foundational to know that I have the ability to make those mistakes and I'm not going to be punished for it.
And as you think about the employee pathway experience from, job requisition to interview to 90-day onboarding to orientation to quarterly or trimester reviews, whatever the case may be, to performance improvement plans, even to succession and exit, like what are some of the most challenging parts of that employee pathway process that you see pretty consistently with organizations? Meaning, do the majority of organizations that you work with, are they not doing an effective 90-day onboarding plan? Are they not being true to their quarterly performance reviews? Are they not asking the right questions in their quarterly performance reviews? Are they depending on their annual reviews to do a full evaluation as opposed to doing the regular iterative check-ins? What are some of the things that you see functionally that an organization can kind of fall into that reduces the hope of those employees?
Well, it's what we just talked about, Corey. There's inconsistency and a lack of standardization, a lack of resources and technology. And the other big thing is the lack of data. So what happens then is people rely on subjectivity. So the performance evaluations are the perfect example of that, right? where nobody likes them, right? And the reason I think is because a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know how accurate that depiction of me really was.
True.
And they didn't take this into consideration and that. So you know what I think one of the best use cases for generative AI, Corey, is we're going to have generative AI. We're going to have Chat GPT do your performance evaluation in the future. Think about it. If the technology has the ability to say, okay, Corey, what 5 people should we go talk to learn more about you? The technology, Chat GPT could contact those 5 people
Yep.
and ask them, hey, what's your take on Corey? It will read the responses, aggregate them, then go pull in the HRIS system and see what your attendance data is. Are you compliant with your schedule? Do you have your appropriate training and education up to date? Have you had any employee relations issues? What are your objectives, and are you meeting your goals? Like, it can pull literally dozens, if not hundreds of data points,
Yep.
and then write the review of here's how Corey is doing, and
Yep.
hand it to your manager. And then the manager goes, this is pretty good. I would add a couple things, because we'll never drive the subjectivity completely out of the workplace in human interaction, nor do I think we should. But think about that scenario, man, where all of a sudden we're using systems, technology, data in a standardized, consistent way, and then we're adding a human element at the end to ensure that that remains.
And that's where I wrote at the very beginning, you talked about how we must be willing to embrace this new type of technology. We don't need to fear that it's replacing. So it's embrace versus replace,
That's
right?
right. It's
And
augment.
yeah,
That's what people need to. It's not artificial intelligence. It's augmented intelligence.
absolutely. And even in the work that we do in terms of where an organization, they will complete an anonymous organizational trust assessment, it becomes such a powerful springboard into authentic conversation, because then it's not about personality or power or those different dynamics. It's about, this is the mirror, this is your organization. Now that we've looked at ourselves in the mirror, we can do an MRI, we can go deeper, and we can actually do something with the data. It's actionable. It is both inarguable and actionable. And that is best case scenario, especially when you're talking about a team member who works 2,000 hours a year. There's no way that a supervisor can adequately by themselves come up with a comprehensive evaluation without some kind of a consistency or standardization or aid of technology, things like that. So that is a very, very exciting, very, very exciting prospect for the future, for sure. So Marcus, when you think about your work with trust, like, where do you want to continue to just go deeper or with hope rather? Where do you want to continue to go deeper with this topic of hope, whether it's an industry specific or a level of leadership, or perhaps the number of years that they've been a leader? So where do you want to continue to dive deep into this topic of hope?
Yeah, I think it's just I'm not sure it would be the honest answer, because I think it still needs a lot of definition for a lot of people. It's one of those topics, like how often do you hear people talk about hope at work? Probably not very often. It's also really hard to measure it.
Yeah.
And it's experienced very differently for each person. So I think it comes back to something that you said to me recently about how important active listening is. I think we need to get a lot better. I think, again, I said this earlier and I'll reiterate it. Work is very personal and it's very relational. And it's where we spend the majority of our lives, Corey. And so I think we need to get better at it. And so if we can get better at active listening with the individuals that report to us, with our peers at work, understand them in an intimate way, and understand how they respond to the environment, what makes them hopeful, and then make sure that they have those things in place, then we're going to be much better off. Systemically, structurally, how do we do that? Well, that's something I got to try to figure out over the next few years. But I think it's really important that we do. I love that you created your trust model, right? And that there's 3 major things that you look for. And the third, the caring for others.
Yep.
I think that's the most critical, right? I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, people don't care what you know until they know how much you care.
Yep.
And so the confidence piece and the other piece, like, again, those are important. You have to have three legs to that stool that you've created. But the care for others, I think that's where people will respond the most.
And it's also, our data shows that caring for others is it's the weakest building block of the three.
Right.
But for you, like, maybe it's both human resources, but also hope resources.
Mm.
It's a different way of thinking about HR. It isn't just about, it's more than just a human. We want hopeful humans. We really do. And that doesn't require a tremendous expensive initiative. In fact, wouldn't you agree that sometimes the most simple, least expensive, completely free, like listening, that oftentimes that's what creates or sparks hope. And then it's just about being consistent in that. But it does not take huge amounts of money to create hope. In fact, sometimes those things are actually going to impede it. But Marcus, one of the things that I really want to make sure that our listeners can do is that they can access the work that you are doing. And so, whether it's through LinkedIn or a website or a newsletter, what would be some of the ways that our listeners can connect with you or learn more about this work on hope that you're doing?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the best venue as of today, where I've got a newsletter out there. Of course, you can connect with me out there. I try to post quite a bit. I try to write a little bit outside of LinkedIn as well occasionally, but that's a great place to start. And then I'm hoping to follow in your footsteps, Corey, and to get a podcast started this year, to look for some opportunities to maybe expand onto other mediums of communication. You and I were talking about, should we be on TikTok and should we be on Instagram a little bit more? And so I'm an old guy, so I'm trying to figure out, like, it's like those progressive commercials of us turning into our parents. I'm trying to avoid that. So, but for now, I think LinkedIn's the best way to reach me.
Well, Marcus, thank you so much for, number one, your friendship. Thank you for your consistent deep dive into this vital universal truth and universal need that we all have, which is hope. Thank you for helping me think about trust in a different way and coupling both hope and trust as really close confidants of each other. And thank you just for who you are and the work that you're doing. And for our listeners, I just want to encourage you to connect with Marcus on LinkedIn, check out his newsletter, be on the lookout for his podcast coming up, because the work that he is doing on hope is remarkable. It is hopeful and it's vital. So, Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Corey, and love the work that you're doing. And I'm so thankful to have somebody to watch and take risks and to do new things and go, I wonder how Corey did that. You've been a phenomenal example over the last couple of years, and I really appreciate it, and really appreciate our friendship as well.
Well, and that has been fueled in no small way thanks to your encouragement and your pushing me to do this. So I want to thank you for that as well, Marcus. So, all right. Well, until next time, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast, the Closing the Trust Gap podcast. And we'll look forward to our episode in a couple of more weeks. And until then, be well. Thank you.